Next installment of Revelation. So let me get, if you've got a Bible, feel free to grab it. By the way, I'm going to announce this this morning, but this is our most recent directory here from 2016. So I brought it as like a prop to show this morning. And so we're at the 10-year anniversary mark of our last directory, and so we have a new company, and that's coming August 21st through the 23rd to take pictures to do a new church directory. So it's very exciting, very, very exciting. So exactly, yes, and I suspect we'll get more after that one is printed, but this will be enormously helpful, and we can continue to add to a digital version of it, so that'll be excellent. So I brought out my heavy-duty Bible. I brought out my HarperCollins Study Bible. You can tell I'm losing parts of it. Like they used to put, I don't know if they still do this, the flimsiest little paper here for notes, as if like my pen or pencil wouldn't go right through that thing. But I'm going to open up to Revelation, and as I do, I'm going to pick up where we left off last week. We started talking about the cross. And one of the reasons it's important to talk about the cross is because even though you may not have the image of the cross in Revelation prominent, the cross is pretty much everywhere, because 28 different times Jesus is referred to as the slain lamb. 28 times. And people will make a big deal of the fact that, 7 times 4 is 28 mentions. Maybe that's intentional, and likely is. But the idea that Jesus is the lamb who was slain, so literally what that means is like it's a lamb whose throat was slit and it's ready to be sacrificed, right? That's what that means. Later, when we get to the image of Jesus as a rider of a white horse, it's a fascinating scene, but one of the details that's mentioned is that his robe is soaked in blood. And there's a long history of interpretation that Jesus is this sort of, was the meek and mild lamb that was slain, but then he comes as the rider on the white horse, who's the exact opposite, ready to kick butt and take names. And so when the detail is that his own robe is saturated in blood, that is the blood of his enemies. But there's also an interpretive stream that says, no, he's the slain lamb throughout the book of Revelation. Perhaps the blood that is soaked into his robe as the rider of the white horse is his own. That would be more consistent with what he's referred to 28 different times. It is the slaughtered lamb. So sometimes you might hear this saying that, Jesus may have come the first time as a lamb, but he's coming back as a lion. But you remember that centralizing vision there in Revelation 4 where, John's looking at the scroll with the 7 seals, and he sees an elder sort of cry out, behold the lion of the tribe of Judah, and he looks up, and the lion's actually the slain lamb, right? So that is the constant imagery that is used for Jesus. You might expect some triumphant lion, but it's the slaughtered lamb all throughout. And even in his victorious ride as the rider of the white horse, the blood that's spilled is not the blood of the enemies for his victory, it's his own. So where do you take that? If that's the imagery about Jesus, then really, how you make sense of the cross it's going to shape the way in which we interpret this book, where the central figure is the slain lamb. And so the question we were kind of tossing back and forth last week was the cross. Is this something that God required in order to have the capacity to forgive? Or maybe you could put it another way. Is this a condition that God set some kind of perfect sacrifice in order for forgiveness to be given? Or is the cross something else? Is the cross something that says more about us when we receive the incarnation of God's love and power, that we sort of respond with the cross? What is the cross? And what's God's relationship to it? And how you answer that, it's going to really shape the way that we see the slain lamb here. So let me just throw that back out there. How have you, like, if you have sort of a way of understanding the cross worked out in your mind, I'd be glad to hear it if you want to share it. But if that's maybe you have more questions into answers, maybe you could share ways you've heard the cross talked about or preached about or taught. How have you heard the cross unpacked, made sense of? Or can you think of any hymns or songs you've sung? The Old Rugged Cross. Okay. All right. Let's see. It's a great one. Should have been the first one that came to my mind, but it honestly didn't. What songs have you sung about the cross? Old Rugged Cross. Ah, yes. Perfect. I'm just going to look in my little index here. I'm going to pull out Old Rugged Cross. Y'all may know the lyrics by heart. I can sing the refrain, but I can't remember the verses. On a hill far away is the old rugged cross. Okay. And I love that old cross. Is it called the Old Rugged Cross? Maybe it's called, is it just called Rugged Cross? This is probably preacher malpractice. I should know where that is, but I don't even know the words. Well, there are sections in here, which is really cool. You've got the sections up here in the corners. If you start to flip through, you can see different themes, but it also kind of goes through like mission and witness, love and gratitude, but also the life and the ministry of Jesus. 548. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, John. Boom. All right. Old rugged cross. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem of suffering and shame. And I love that old cross where the dearest and best for a world of lost sinners was slain. So I'll cherish the old rugged cross. I always hear that, so I'll cherish the old rugged cross. You know, I always hear that in the back of my mind, that response. And exchange it for someday for a crown. Anything in these lyrics that strike you as like, well, here's what this song is saying about the cross. To pardon and sanctify me. So somehow the cross it's central in forgiving my sins and sanctifying me, making me holy. Like if I was unclean or unholy, the cross is the place where I am cleansed, right? Made pure, forgiven. Okay? Definitely see this contrast between sort of the rugged ugliness of it, but also the beauty of it, right? In verse 2, in that third line, so if you go down 3 musical stanzas there, where in that in that second verse, the dear Lamb of God left his glory above to bear it to dark Calvary. So it's talking a little bit about that somehow this is an instrument in which we are cleansed, we are forgiven. It is gruesome, it is ugly, but it is also radiant beauty at the same time. which is, it's still hard to figure out, well, okay, so how is the ugliness of this connect with sort of my forgiveness, my being made clean, or my being made holy? There's still sort of like this, this question is like, where does God factor into this? Did God orchestrate this? Is God ultimately responsible for the cross? Or sort of humanity kind of, and it's our own cruelty, responsible for the cross? And depending on which way you go, like how does our grace and our sanctification play into that? When I was growing up, there was, maybe not growing up, I don't know when the song was, but I remember singing it a lot when I was younger, in high school, college. This song, I think it was by Chris Tomlin, called How Great Is Our God. Are y'all familiar with it? How great is our God. Sing with me, how great. Well, it's a beautiful song. It was very moving, but there is one part where you get to it, and every time we got to it, it was just like nails just on a chalkboard, because we would get to a line where it was a very kind of sweeping, like it's like the full like emotional force of the song hits right as you say that on the cross, God's wrath was satisfied. And I was just like, oh, like, is that? So we're saying our God is so great because God's wrath is satisfied on the cross. Like God needed a target for all of the pent-up wrath, for all of the spread sinfulness and unholiness of the history of the world. And so the cross is the place where God gets to like, raw, just unload it all. And then once the wrath is spent, once the punishment is satisfied, then we're able to say we are forgiven. And Christ, knowing that God needed to unleash that wrath, receives it on our behalf. Many will point out, the line in Romans that the wages of sin is death. And so that there's just sort of this cosmic calculus that, if you sin, you've fallen short of the glory of God, and all have, then the wages of sin, what you earn by that sin, is death. That is the just punishment. But then Jesus sort of takes that punishment on your behalf and dies on the cross. And it's gruesome, it is torture, but it is to cover the mass scale of humanity's sin and earn those wages of all of our sin. So it's like a transaction there. Does anybody else have any way of thinking about the cross that you've heard? Or it's kind of it's just rattling back there some way because you've either sung it in a hymnal or you've heard it?
When I think of the cross, it seems to me to be a physical manifestation of worldly power.
Okay.
The state power.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how else to say it other than that.
Okay.
The Roman method of dealing with problems.
Yes. Okay. So it's kind of the instrument of the state. This is a tool of capital punishment in the Roman Empire, right? And so this is kind of like a symbol for that kind of power, state power and violence. Yeah. Okay.
And I think when Bronze Age Jews were confronted with a situation where they believed that Christ was the fulfillment of the prophets from the Old Testament, it didn't quite work out the way things were predicted.
Mm-hmm.
They were confronted with a kind of very difficult problem to explain.
Yes.
So they're trying to put two things together that don't mix well.
Yeah. 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 I think that's really well put. Yeah. One way of asking the question is like, if the crucifixion never happened, would God's grace and forgiveness and sanctification still be as readily available? That's another way of putting it. Or is that somehow necessary? And who requires it? Laura and I were talking, was it Friday about, I had recommended a book, and I recommend it to anybody, but it's a book called Sinners in the Hand of a Loving God, right? That's a sort of a take on, the Jonathan Edwards, Sinners in the Hand of a Living God. So, there's like there's a lot of imagery about a God that's full of wrath and the punishment that is so severe it's at stake to sort of freak you out enough, it'll literally scare the hell out of you and you give your life to Jesus, right? But Brian Zahnd kind of takes that and flips that on its head and says that's not the character of God that we want to portray with the cross, and so it's sinners in the hands of a loving God and portrays the cross quite differently. And Laura, would you be willing to share a little bit of what you were sharing with me about how Brian talks about the cross?
If I'm remembering correctly, I think I would say how he kind of flips the narrative to the build up of David's point about the cross is kind of like a symbol of the state power, like the power and principality of that time. It was almost like it was this human desire for vengeance and wrath that we humans need a victim.
Mm.
And so, but God flips that. He absorbs the full wrath and vindictiveness of human nature and transforms that into his redeeming love. This is like a great example of his love and forgiveness for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, preach. Yeah. Like that's, I mean, it's sort of, another way of saying it is that if you hear sort of or feel inside or you're thinking kind of a calculus that kind of, that imagines God as sort of, God sort of creates the world and responds to our sinfulness with a calculus that requires vengeance or some kind of retribution. That's more of a projection of really human impulses onto God rather than it is anything to say about who God is. If you want to know who God is, it is the God whose love and grace is relentless and will not even be stopped by anything but the cross. So all of those impulses for vengeance, for need a victim, we need a scapegoat, we need all of our capacity for violence and the othering of those and casting blame, and just all of that just gets absorbed into Christ. You might say, some of the church fathers talk about the cross as being the place that absorbs all of the world's sinfulness and darkness and evil, and then after absorbing it, it dies with him, and Jesus is then raised to life, and all of the darkness is put to death. But it's not through sort of a domination. It is through love that just wouldn't stop or turn around. I mean, I think that is a beautiful way of thinking about the cross. So if it is the case that the reason in Revelation the Lamb's robe is soaked in blood, if it's the case, it's not because God just had up there on the ledger, well, that's the price it's going to take in order for you to get my forgiveness or for the world to get my forgiveness. If that's not the case, then the God of Revelation that's on the throne, that the slain lamb is beside, is not the God that Jesus is saving us from, but it's the God that the slain lamb reveals. Another way to say it is that the slain lamb doesn't save us from the God on the throne, but it's the lamb on the cross that is the clearest revelation of who the God on the throne is, right? Through the slain lamb, you see a God whose love and mercy, that is the whole strategy. That is the ultimate core of God's character, is love and grace, and that there is no other strategy outside of love and grace that is relentless to achieve what God wants, to have ultimate reign over creation. That is the only path. And the slain lamb gives us that window into who God is. So if you're thinking about, even though the cross was meant to be a mockery of like the coronation of a king, with the crown of thorns and, lifted high up before of everybody with the sign that says King of the Jews, if that's meant to be a mockery, what Revelation is kind of showing us is that, no, that mockery is real. Like, God on the throne really does look like the lamb on the cross with the crown of thorns. It's not you just had to endure this to get something great. It's that God is sort of eternal love with an eternal capacity to suffer with until all of the wounds are healed. That is God's throne. That is God's character. That is God's strategy. The lamb shows you who God is. So, yes.
Are there any interpretations that maybe look at, and I apologize if this isn't fully formed, but it seems that if you believe that the Bible is an instrument of God to try to teach lessons and to communicate information
Mm-hmm.
to creation,
Mm-hmm.
man in particular, that one of the lessons might be from the cross that don't expect the through behavior in a godlike manner to overwhelm or overcome in a conquering sense instruments of state power, but instead recognize that for you to live the way that God expects you to live, you should expect to conflict with state power and to have to sacrifice yourself to it.
Hmm.
And that that's there's going to be a lot of short-term losses for long-term gain. And I think about Martin Luther King
Mm-hmm.
and his commitment to nonviolence.
Yes.
And the idea is, look, the way that you ultimately achieve your goal, to bring the kingdom of heaven down to earth, is not by fighting against state power with guns and ammunition,
Mm-hmm.
but by overwhelming it with love. But if you're going to do that,
Mm-hmm.
you have to be willing to throw yourself on the instruments of state power and sacrifice yourself.
Mm.
Does anybody, are there any like smart theologians that write that way?
Yeah, that give kind of a Martin Luther King kind of like framework for Revelation. Yeah, absolutely.
Or just the idea of sacrificial lamb as opposed to the conquering hero that Old Testament Jews were looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is kind of where two interpretive streams can really sort of go apart in Revelation. If you believe that ultimately God's the kind of God that has a calculus of justice that requires this and can use this sort of violence, it's a God that can use sort of state power's form of capital punishment for God's purposes, right? And then you might see in Revelation a God like that orchestrates the final consummation of everything God wants for the world through things like Armageddon, where I'm unleashing the forces of heaven that's going to just kick the world's butt in battle, right? The forces of evil. I'm going to slaughter my enemies. All of the plagues and the calamities that come, all of these are tools of God kind of flexing to get attention. That's one interpretive stream, and I think it's really rooted in, do you think God can baptize these same forms of power as we know them, but just use them for God's purposes? The other stream of interpretation would be what you just articulated. No, if the slain lamb is our clear window into who God is, the slain lamb doesn't get off the cross and then try to wield it, right, for others. The slain lamb is always going to be the kind of love that is willing to just meet every cross and meet every form of violence and hate and just respond with grace, even if it means getting laid up on the altar again and again, right? That is, you will overwhelm these forces and transform through that love and grace. And if that is the window into who God is, then whatever you read in sort of these Armageddon depictions and the calamities and whatnot, what you can't see is that these are tools of God slapping around at God's enemies, but they're saying something else. So I'm definitely in the camp. So like when you bring up Martin Luther King Jr., I think I've quoted this in sermons before, just because it's just so moving. But it's where he talks about a double victory, right? On the one hand, Martin Luther King Jr. in the Civil Rights Movement, it talks about nonviolence as a strategy, right? We can prick the hearts of the nation. They can see children in Birmingham in front of hoses and dogs, and this will shock the conscience. And we can mobilize people to change laws or create laws, right? Voting rights, ending segregation, so on and so forth. And some would say, well, that's the end goal of, we want changed laws. Like we want the structure of this country's laws, and that is our victory. If we can achieve it through nonviolence, so be it, but we'll do it. But Martin Luther King Jr., again, as a person of faith, says that's not enough. I want to change the laws, but I want to transform my enemy in the process. And so he writes in this sermon where he speaks directly to his enemies. It says, you can bomb our churches, and you can drag us out of our homes in the dead of night, and you can threaten us with death, and we will still love you. And then he goes on and says all of the things that could be done to them, threaten their children, spit on them, so on and so forth. He says, and we will still love you. And at the end of it, he says, we will overwhelm your capacity to hate by our capacity to love. And so we will not only win freedom for ourselves, but we will win you in the process, right? And that will be for us a double victory. That to me is like so much right at the core of how I interpret the strategy of the slain lamb, right? It is overwhelming the world's capacity to hate, to fight, to wield things like crosses. And God is saying, I will overwhelm your capacity to hate by my capacity to love. You can crucify Christ on a cross and put him in a grave, and I will still love you. You can throw my followers to the lions, and I will still love you. And in the end, I will win not just what I want for the world, my followers, but I will win you in the process. I will win the world. To me, that is the overarching framework of Revelation. Not everybody agrees to that, right? Some people see there's a lot of imagery and violence in Revelation, and you can easily think, well, that's just a tool wielded by God. But in the way that I imagine the cross, the way I imagine Christ, is very much in the stream of a Martin Luther King Jr. kind of thought. It is a world transformed by nonviolent, non-retributive, relentless and unconditional love, whose capacity to suffer a cross and anything like it overwhelms anything the beasts of empire can throw at God. That's the slain lamb victorious overall. And so if you're one of the 7 churches in Asia Minor, you might have real questions of whether or not that's a winning strategy, right? And people did in the civil rights movement. Nonviolence was not universally accepted in the civil rights movement. Not everybody said that's effective, right? Very good debates, thorough debates about, like, look, all we have are our lives, right? All we have are our lives. Like, why are we going to lay our lives on the altar of hate so that we could win our enemy? Like, we want freedom. Let's be practical, right? So it is a hard sell, but I do, the way I interpret Revelation is that is exactly the kind of message that John is trying to sell to the 7 churches. Because listen, do you remember those letters to the 7 churches early on? What often will either critique or praise based on their patience and capacity to endure, right? Be patient and long-bearing, and be patient and endure. And that shows up throughout Revelation. The call to the churches seems to be patient and to endure. If you're facing the beasts of empire, and the claws come out because your allegiance is to Christ alone and you're not willing to subordinate your allegiance to Christ to Caesar or whatever sort of the civil religion is of Rome, when the claws come out from the beast, be patient and endure and face it in the way of the slain lamb, right? Like that's the pitch. That is the call. It's what you might call, in the words of Jesus in the Gospels, the call John gives to the churches in Revelation is to pick up your cross and follow me, right? That seems to be the call. And I've just heard Revelation interpreted too many times and in too many ways. The way God gets God's victory is because God's just a more powerful Caesar and wields power the same way all the other Caesars do. And I don't think that's the message. I really don't. Any thoughts or comments about that before we jump farther in?
David's question, things that it made me think about is, I guess, quotation convicts me, particularly as a person who's pretty comfortable in all other means.
Yeah.
Phrase by Doris Day, that Christians should live in a way that only makes sense if there's a God. So if I'm living in a way that kind of makes sense according to the world, then I'm not meeting that standard because
Yeah.
I live the way that I live in an ordinary understanding.
Yeah.
So that hits pretty hard.
Yeah.
Thinks about, in what ways am I not taking enough risk?
Oh, interesting. In what ways am I not taking enough risk? It's an interesting question.
More maybe kind of related to what Dr. David was saying earlier. I wondered, it's part of the struggle with this interpretation that I have personally.
Yes.
I'm a Jesuit priest, I'm a Baptist background, so it's a very strong emphasis, obviously, on the wrath of God.
Yes.
And somebody, right, to satisfy the demands of what, God's holiness. I can't quite bring the interpretation. So obviously, the emphasis is God is holy and just, supreme ruler of the universe. That's just being, like, you can't get around it. You have to satisfy that desire for holiness. But I'm also very convicted by like what I just described with what Don said, where we actually flip the narrative, that God's actually pursuing us, transforming the human desire for another sort of like victim
Yes.
to satisfy whatever this need is for judgment or justice. And so my question then is, how, because it seems like it's getting a little too close to universalism where everybody just gets to go to heaven.
Yeah.
No questions asked.
Yeah.
So what do you think then in the cases of where there is a lot of evil and suffering in the
Yes.
world, and even though we know that God is determined to meet
Yes.
each and every one of us, what does justice look
Mm.
like? What does judgment look like? And so to bring this home, why I started thinking about this last night, John and I were driving to Berea for dinner, past that bank, where there was that very tragic shooting.
Ah,
Guy
yes.
that shot people in cold blood.
Yes.
So I was just thinking out loud. I was like, what does everything bad coming untrue look like for the victim, for the family, and for the person that shot them?
Yes.
So that's where I'm like, that's why I still struggle. It's like, what
Mhm.
does judgment look like? And I
Yeah.
don't think it's going to be something that any one of us is really like, because we're not going to get
Yeah.
all satisfactory answers. I also just always kind of wonder,
Yes.
what that is like when you still have a world full of evil and suffering.
Yes. Yes. I think it's such a good question. What is justice? If God's sort of the God of like unconditional love and relentless suffering in love and grace, like what does justice look like in the end? Because to use the metaphors of Revelation, like if you've got these beasts and particular figures that are beastly and have a lot of blood on their hands, what happens if they suddenly just show up in the New Jerusalem and just fist bumping the people that they slaughtered? Like, what is that justice, right? What is this? And I think it's an excellent question. And David's going to answer that for you right now. Thanks, God. Yeah.
Said that, like, you know, the seriousness of the judgment is being,
Right, so
ourselves
that being in the
revealed.
being in the presence of God,
Mhm.
heaven or hell,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the state of your
Yeah.
soul. Like, are you open to being
Mm-hmm.
judged, being exposed?
Mm-hmm.
That is the judgment. That's, I think, it's kind of Eastern Orthodox
Mm-hmm.
interpretation, and David Benton Hart has shared that. Like, it is, what if judgment is being in God's presence, his holy presence,
Yes.
which will expose
Yes.
everything until that's heaven.
Yes.
For those that are willing to change, but then it's hell for those who can't quite submit.
Yeah. Did you read the David Bentley Hart book on universalism?
I started, but it's like I read one sentence at a time.
It's, yeah, same.
It's of David Bentley Hart. It's like,
It's like, yes, I'm the same way. So when you just quoted, I was just like, dang, it's a dense book. David Bentley Hart is a scholar who wrote this book not long ago that kind of takes on this idea that universalism is some kind of new, ushy-gushy kind of like, modern theology, and kind of traces it back to the patristics to show that there's a strong stream there, and then kind of unpacks what some of it is. But anyways, so I think it's a great question. I do think that whatever justice looks like, and the answer is I have no idea. Like, who knows what justice looks like? But I do wonder, and this is really me wondering, I wonder if the way I once imagined standing before God and like, I have all my life, behind me, and then my time comes and there I am before God, and like, there's that moment and I'll know, am I in or out, I don't know why that sequence has been so powerful, because it could be, there's nothing to keep me from thinking about the journey with God after death and the life that I know as being even more mysterious and having the capacity for transformation along the way. Like, there is what you described, like being able to behold yourself in the light of truth, to truly see yourself for you, who you have been, what you have done, to feel the full contrition of it, to even be decimated by it if you're one of these beasts of empire, and then to be known that once you feel the full weight of it, to also then feel undergirded by love that's not willing to cast you aside. For that kind of transformation, to me, that gets closer to like the Martin Luther King Jr., like I'm going to, like this nonviolence, he's hoping will be able to even penetrate the layers of hate or the layers of what's just been taught and ingrained for so much time, even to the hardest of Klansmen, the hardest of whatever he would call an enemy, that somehow it could penetrate and they would be able to see and repent and be transformed by. Like that was his ultimate desire, and for him that was justice, right? But so I don't know what justice could look like, but it seems to me there are infinite possibilities of what that could look like after our time comes. And so I don't know. I think there's a lot of possibility. And it could be, there's theologians, and you, as Brad Jerzak, I know you've mentioned, and others, C.S. Lewis had something similar in The Great Divorce that imagines that there are some people who can see themselves for who they are, or see the enemies they have that's in the New Jerusalem, and see the grace of God at work, and just be like so just formed in the need for just the hammer to come down, or just so distorted by their own hate or something that they can sort of see themselves, see God's character, see sort of what God's kingdom looks like in fullness, and just say, I want nothing of it, and just walk on out on their own agency. You know, like, but it's not because God says, get away from me, but it is be like, if this is heaven, I want no part, right? So like there could be that kind of possibility. I don't know, but it does seem, you know, is it possible that there's some sense of justice, even if ultimately there is a relentless love that is available to all? That's a question for each of us. How are we defining justice, and what do we think are potential avenues? So, yeah, please, yes.
Justice. Struck a chord because I've dealt with justice in the military, criminal justice in both the military and the civilian world.
Yes.
It might be surprising for people to know that in the military, there are the stated goals of criminal justice, like specific deterrence, general deterrence, rehabilitation.
Mhm.
Retribution is
Not one. Could you name those things again?
Yeah.
This is the military?
to make, deter this person from committing this act.
Yes.
General deterrence, punish this person in such a fashion that it communicates to others not to commit this act.
Uh-huh.
And rehabilitation,
Mm.
bring this person to a manner of thinking so
Mm.
they don't commit the act in the future.
Mhm.
And that they're provided with the skills and resources in order to not be tempted to engage in that behavior in the future.
Mhm.
But retribution, punishment's sake, okay?
Mhm.
Absolutely, forbidden it to be considered by the sentence the jury handled in a court martial.
Fascinating.
In the civilian
Yes.
retribution, it's right up there at the top.
Really.
Like all of retribution and like whatever you're following. Yeah.
Punishment, yeah.
Okay.
Punishment of that individual for their wrong.
That somehow so if the harm causes the scales of justice to be imbalanced, right? The way that you balance those scales is by inflicting harm in a comparable manner to help equal it. Is that
I'm not advocating
right? I'm just trying to unpack that. Yeah. 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 That's fascinating. That is fascinating. What?
and to consider the quantity of harm that's been inflicted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if there were, again, I don't know how this works at court martial, obviously in civil, there's monetary damages. Do they have the goal of not only making the person whole again, but then, damages above that as a dissuasion from doing that? Is that
A fine is something, forfeiture of wages, pay. I want to say I don't recall,
But then the goal of that would be not to necessarily make the person whole, but it would be like you said, the specific and general. Yeah.
Deterrent. Yeah, that is so fascinating. And here's the thing. On the one hand, I want to say that like any sort of sense of justice where to restore the balance of justice or the scales of justice, any harm has to be answered with like a harm of a comparable manner, and that balance, like I want to reject that until we get to like very heinous examples, and then somehow inside of me there's something there that's like, yeah, like, and that's just there, like that's there. But I do wonder, like, where does that come from? And I don't mean to trivialize what we're talking about by using like a trite parenting example, but like, this was like I think to the point where Tiffany was just like so exhausted by this. I really wanted to like discuss our like parenting philosophy and like, ad nauseum about, how we discipline them, just because I was just want to make sure that we come at this with thoughtfulness but effectiveness. And she's just like, whatever, just like do what you want to do. Like, yes, but she has thoughts too. But ultimately, the way that we the kind of thing that we're implementing is like if you've done a harm or you've done something you're not supposed to, the first step is to sort of find a way where it breaks through the repercussions of the harm. Like, whatever it is, does it break through and you can see how it hurt others or it did something to somebody else? Like, can you absorb that without sort of immediately justifying, well, I only did it because he started, like, can you just absorb what you're responsible for? And then once you do, are you able to then take the next step to go apologize and sort of admit like what you have become clear for, what you truly now believe is like what you have done that is wrong with them? Can you apologize face to face? And then can you then decide, how can I repair this? How can I make it better? And this goes beautifully without any hitches all the time. I say so, guys, like, right, obviously, it's a train wreck most of the time. But like, that is the hope. That's the trajectory, right? A sense of contrition where you absorb the harm that you've caused. And after you do it, you can communicate that to the person that you have harmed or those affected by it. And then you then take the next step of working with them to figure out, how can I repair this? What can I do to respond, to help bring repair? And the hope is that there's a restored relationship there, right? That's meant to me, in my little, naive parenting mind, that's my sense of justice as we discipline our kids. That's getting more complicated now as time goes on, but that's like the general arc. But I do think it's what you ask is just, it really gets to the core of like, how do we define justice, and what's a kind of justice what sort of justice, if God is the one whose kingdom has come and God's will is done on earth as it is in heaven, like we see in Revelation, what do we think justice looks like for even the beasts of the empire and all of its iterations? Is there a way for a just outcome where even the beasts are transformed? It's a great question. That's a great, great question. So, any final I don't think we read a word of Revelation, but but any last comments or questions, and then we can pick up next week.
I guess, what I'm looking forward to is, I know I missed a couple of weeks when we were traveling in this book, talking about Revelation as like, these are the beasts of the empire, and it's setting it up as, like you said, it isn't God as like the more powerful Caesar, but still
Yeah.
Caesar. There are definitely things in Revelation that are worded in a way that is agency directed.
Oh, yeah.
At God.
Yes.
So, there are some separations.
Yeah.
Some casting into places.
Yes.
Sheep and goats.
Yes.
That do definitely put, I think, like I said, that metaphor has to be something different
Mm-hmm.
for those kinds of passages.
Mm-hmm.
So, a waiting. Because, like, I'm on board with,
Yeah.
this sounds nice, it's an easy way to deal with some really weird looking
Yeah.
passages in Revelation that I'm
Yeah.
making sense of in light of other things.
Yes.
But there are those passages there that the
Yes.
people who have more of that
Mm-hmm.
atonement model for
Mm-hmm.
cross will point to.
Such a good point. Would you mind to come back next week with a couple of those passages, and let's dive into those, because I think it's really good, because it's why Revelation, I think, it's one of the reasons why it was so controversial. Do we get it in the canon? Because there are descriptions of God that you can't sort of metaphorize your way out of. Like, this is agency to a God who seems to bring a big old hammer and crush, right? And there was a lot of there was pushback on what seemed like internal dissonance between the slain lamb and a God that seems to rain down holy terror.
It's not those words where I'm brought into the presence of God. I can either accept this lovingness, you know, and deal with like how it reveals all my ugliness, yet still loved. There seems to be some definite. It's not, yeah. Well, it's not me making that decision to walk out.
Right. It's God. Yeah. Yes. It's a great point. Let's dive into those passages next week where God's the bad guy or a certain kind of just God, we might say. Yeah. All right. Very cool. All right. Thank you all very much. Hey, Mel. Hello.